Alrighty, I believe we're good to go. Hello everyone and welcome to another programming challenge. It's been a little bit. Today we're going to be doing something a little similar to what we did last time in C. We're going to be working with HTTP again, which is such a fun topic. But the difference is this time we're going to be doing it in C# and we're going to be creating a full static file server. So the reason why I'm doing C# is I've recently started using it a lot more, and then I was working in it and I found how powerful it really is, especially with networking. So we're going to look into that, and we'll see how easy it is to actually just set up an easy server. Okay, so let's first let's just go ahead and start by creating our project. So we'll go into Visual Studio. Hold on. Just need to make sure something's working. Oh, there we go. Okay. Just wanted to make sure it was working. It wasn't showing up there. Okay. So we have, we're going to do C#, and we're just going to do an empty console app if that exists. Does that exist here? There we go. Console app.NET framework. I guess I'll have to, I'll just leave it in here for now, but then I'll move it into the folder later. So we'll call it static HTTP server. We'll just go ahead and create. Okay. Let's just go ahead and start by doing our console log hello world, or not console log. Just to make sure everything is configured properly. And I don't know why, but you have to do Control F5 if you want the window to stay open, but we have hello world there. All good. Okay. So we're going to start, I guess we can either create a class or we can just go out of the main file, and I was thinking we just, let's go out, let's create a class, because the point of the static file server is that you can run it anywhere. So we're going to want to pass in parameters, and it might just be easier to organize things into a class. So I'm going to call it static file server.cs, and a couple of the parameters that we'll end up needing. Well, you can think of this file server as just an abstraction of a TCP listener. So a TCP listener, you need a URL, which is pretty standard. So that'll just be a private string host URL. And that's pretty much all you need to start up the server. But since we want to be able to just run this application wherever, like as an executable, and specify a path to host files out of, we're going to want to add a host directory. So this can either be relative, absolute, doesn't matter. It just needs to be able to find it from the executable path. So we will do that. So that's our host directory. And then we'll also have a couple of other files, or just preset files that we'll need. And we will see where these come into play, but these will just be for error and not found paths. So it's private string not found path, and I'm just going to set this for now. We're not going to get complicated with the parameters. So these will just be files that we send when we run into an error or we cannot find the file. So error path is equal to error.html. Okay. Oh, sorry, give me 2 seconds, and let me just actually, I didn't set up my directories properly. So I need to go here, 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 and then view. Let me actually, suppose I can just do it in Visual Studio. Yeah, we'll be good. Okay. All right, so we have our host URL, host directory, and we also need to have the actual listener object. So it's not going to be a TCP listener, it's going to be an object called HttpListener. So private HttpListener listener. And this is going to be something that we have to import from system.net. So that's just using up here. And this is just an abstraction of a TCP listener, except you can format responses and you can get requests in a way that you can process it as an HTTP request. So we will then have our constructor, and we'll just try and run something simple just to see if everything's active. So public static file server takes in a host directory and a host URL, and we just want to initialize our objects. So host URL, or sorry, we have to say this dot host URL, and this dot host directory is equal to host directory. Let me actually just reorder these real quick. Okay, and then we will also have a run method. So the constructor will just be to set up our variables, and we'll probably add more options in as time goes on. But we will then let's go ahead and add our run method. So it's public async. So I haven't talked too much about async. Well, I guess I haven't talked about C# at all. So async essentially just allows you to run methods asynchronously on a separate thread in a way. So async methods must return task, but they can also return tasks with a parameter. So task, we could say task bool, and this would return a boolean. And we can also just say task integer, and this would return an integer. And we'll see how that comes into play, but for we'll say integer for now, and it'll just be run async, and we can also just pass in parameters as normal. So in an async method, what we get is the ability to call other async methods and then await their completion. So async methods, like I said, they're asynchronous. So you essentially just trigger them and they can run on a separate thread, but you don't need to get their result. You can just allow them to run for as long as you want, and you can also cancel them with something called a cancellation token that works on some of them. But right now we're just going to go ahead and create our listener. So listener is equal to new HTTP listener. And then we need to add the host URL, and that's going to be done through listener.prefixes.add, and we just pass in host URL. And then listener.start, so this just starts everything up. And we can just log that we're writing on or listening on this URL. So console.writeLine listening on host URL. So I suppose if you haven't programmed in C# before, it's going to look a little weird. Like this is just a formatter string. But if you're coming from Java, it looks almost the same. The template parameters, this is a template parameter where you can kind of customize a class to have a certain type. So it can have like I'm not going to go too much into detail, but you can have a task int, and you can also have a task bool or a task any object, and that just essentially specifies what you need to return with. So we can, at the end of the method, we can just do return 0, and this would be a valid return because it's async, so we're going to be awaiting stuff. So the task is kind of a promise that this function will have an integer when it's awaited. So we're going to see how await works right now. We're going to have a while running loop here. So this will be the main loop, and we need to have a boolean to tell us whether or not we're running. So private bool running, And then we need to set running to true once we start the server. And then while running, we're going to get a request, and then we're also going to send a response. So how do we do this? With the listener, they make it super simple. You essentially await a context from the listener, and that context has your request object, and it also populates a response object that it will send back to the client. So it's as simple as this. HTTP listener context, we'll say CTX, is equal to listener dot get context async. So you might be saying, well, why is there this red line? Well, context async, this is just another async method, and it returns an HTTP listener context. But because this is an async method, we have to do something, and that is the await method, or the await keyword. So we essentially halt execution on this line. It's like setting a breakpoint, but you don't get to take control of it. You halt execution on this line until get context async returns its HTTP listener context. So it's kind of just a thread blocker. We're awaiting the result of this. We could just get, another way we could do it is we could say variable CTX task is equal to listener.getContextAsync, and this would be the actual task object. So you can see there it's just a task of this. We can also just explicitly define that. So you can call the method as normal with the type and you will get it, but then in the context here, when we actually want to get this result, we just have to say await CTX task. So we await the task to complete. Now let's go through what the context object has. So we'll print out a couple things. We'll do a console.writeLine, new request, and we will use a formatter string here. So with the $, that's called string interpolation, I believe, where you can do the $, and then you can just input variables and they will automatically concatenate. So we'll print out a URL, so ctx.request.url. So this context has a request object, which is an HTTP listener request, and the URL is just what the URL is. And we also want to get the method, so we'll say ctx.request, and you can just use IntelliSense to go through this, but there's an HTTP method. There's also an input stream if you wanted to read a file, but we'll just take care of the HTTP method and the URL for now. All right, and well, you know what, let's actually just run this to make sure that we're actually getting requests. So, oh, because I don't actually start it, that's why. So we need to go say static file server, server is equal to new static file server, and we'll just pass in the host URL. So this is going to be a little interesting, but we could just do localhost on port 8080. That would work. But we're going to do http://+:8080, and then you have to end it with a slash. And then the host directory we'll say is view, even though it doesn't exist right now. But http://+:8080. This is essentially HTTP, that's normal. 8080 is the port. This plus just notes you can do localhost, you can do 127.0.0.1, and you can also do your local IP address on your local Wi-Fi network. So you can go to ipconfig to find that out. I'm not going to show you mine just because I don't want to show you those details, but you can get it from there. Okay, and then we have to do now server.runAsync, and we have to pass in the args. However, this won't work because it will just exit as soon as we get past this, because again, running an async method starts another thread. We're not awaiting the completion right now. So it will just trigger, but then it will also just end the program. So I can start it and it will just end no matter what. So do Control F5 and it just finishes and the server's not running anymore. However, we can await this and it will run until we're done. However, you cannot await unless you're in an async method. But how do we do that with the main method? Well, lucky for us, .NET has a secondary entry point. So you can do static async task main. So it still returns void, but it's returning a promise of void. So this main function essentially gets awaited as well, but we can now await async functions. And you could also do server.run async args .getawaiter.get results, and this will also do the same thing, but await just looks much cleaner, and yeah, but this does return an integer there. So we'll say int result is equal to that, and then we'll just print out ended with code 0, oops, sorry, res, and then we'll just interpolate there too. And then we can also just do console.read key just to keep the window open. Press any key to continue. So read key just pauses and listens to the console. So let's try running this now. Something didn't happen. Access is denied. Okay. I guess that that address wasn't working, so let's just do localhost. And this should work. Yes, there we go. Listening on HTTP localhost 8080. Thank you, Allop. All right, so we'll just go http://localhost 8080 and new request get this. We're not sending any response, but we got the response. That's all that matters right now. So I can just end that with Control-C. And let's actually go and dissect what an HTTP request is. So this is essentially what this text here, I'll zoom in a little bit, but this is a sample HTTP request. It has an accept tag, authorization, which might be there, a bunch of headers. These are all called headers because they have some key and a value. The host could be localhost or whatever, but there's also supposed to be, I suppose this isn't the best one. I don't want to get, this isn't really working, is it? Nice. Sample HTTP request. Because there's supposed to be a method up top. Let's see if these guys have it. Here we go. Yep. So get hello.html, and it wants a version, and it'll have a couple other headers, user agent, host, accept types, stuff like that. And it can also send in content too with a request. This is through a post request. You can also send in JSON content. So for here, this actually sends in XML content. So you specify a content type that you're sending in. And then responses will be like this. So HTTP version, the code, which is 201, which means just created. 200 means okay, and it gives something. 204 means no content. 400 means error. 404 means not found, and 500 means internal server error. But you can have a bunch of headers in your response as well. The one thing you do need is content type, which for here it's JSON because you're returning JSON, and then content length 304. So on a normal web page, like this web page was returned with a 200 response, and the content type was text/HTML. HTTP is Hypertext Transfer Protocol? Yes, I believe. Fact check me on that, but I'm. What does HTTP stand for? Hypertext Transfer Protocol, yeah. So you can transfer any sort of data. You can transfer MP3 files, you can transfer video files, you can transfer anything. You just need to specify the content type. And then content length as well is just whatever the byte length is of your data, just so the receiver knows how much data you're actually sending them. So in C#, with the HTTP listener, we have this listener context gives us all those headers in a very easy way to access. So we already have ctx.request.http method, which is just the request the method, and then we also have the request URL. But we also can get a bunch of the other headers. We can do ctx.request. There's user agent, user host address, all that stuff. But you can also just get the custom headers too, and this is just a dictionary essentially. It's called a name value collection. But it's a dictionary. It maps your keys to your header values. Let's actually send a response now. So we have ctx.request, which is the request, and then our response, well, that's just going to be ctx.response. And let's say this is equal to, ctx.response, and we can specify a bunch of things. So .status code is equal to, let's just say not found for now. So status code is going to be 404, just for not found. And you can also do an integer conversion of a certain enum, which we'll actually do right now. So http status code dot not found. And if you hover over it, you'll see it equals 404. So you can just convert this to an integer, and it'll give you that. And then you can also set couple other things, but for now we'll just set the status code, and then we can do .close. So ctx.response.close essentially sends all the content that we gave it. So status code, all the headers that we specified back to the client. So if we run this now and go to that same URL, http://localhost 8080. I don't know how much I want to show you guys, but let me give me 2 seconds. I'm just going to see if doing this will oh no, we're all good. Okay. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so if you zoom into whatever this is, yeah, so this is on the network tab, and if you just refresh the page, it will log the response, the requests and responses that you make. So if you can see here the status is 404 not found, but it still has the other stuff here, which is cool. Yeah, so we can specify all this stuff. Let's try. Let's look at a couple of other things. So, so far we've just looked at new requests, and we get localhost 8080. But then there's also been this fav icon, and that just means it's requesting an icon. Browsers sometimes do that. Let's try requesting index.html, and it has. Oh, I guess it just didn't like it at all. Oh, there we go. Okay. Yeah. I was paused. But it's still 404 as we programmed it. But then you can see now that the path is index.html. So it's essentially just getting the full URL. But how can we actually parse this URL? Well, again, C# comes in clutch with this little class here. So we can say HTTP method, and then we can also do URL. And then we can also do URL.absolutePath. And this will just get the stuff after the normal stuff. So we can see it just gets index.html instead of the whole localhost URL, which is very cool. So let's create another method in this loop. or in this class rather, that'll be private async. It's going to be another async method, so we have to return a task, and it's going to be process request, and we're just going to pass in the HTTP listener context, CTX. So this gives us access to both the request and the response. So we can parse all the headers, and we can also write to the output, write the response. So we'll get the route just to have on a local variable. So string route is equal to ctx.request.url.absolute_path. And again, I encourage you guys to play around with this stuff. Or sorry, this should be absolute path. But I encourage you guys to play around with all these headers and see what you can find. But let's just do something simple. Let's have a route that corresponds to shutting down the server, just so we don't have to do Control-C every time. So if route is equal to /shutdown, so there's always a preceding slash, then we need to trigger some way, or trigger some break. So in our method here, in our loop, what we want to do is we want to process this response by calling the method. So we'll say await process request, and we'll just pass in the context. But we want to be able to get some value here, so we'll just return a Boolean from this here. So task bool, like so, and then this just says, or actually, let's not return anything from here, because sometimes we don't want to. It might just make things more complicated, but let's say if route is equal to shutdown, then running is equal to false. So this will then allow us to send a response, but then the next iteration we just close the server. So we have while running, and then we also at the end of the loop we want to call listener.close. Forgot that. That's a crucial line, just so it shuts down the socket properly. So we await processing the request, and then whatever values we've given it in here, then we will close the response and send it. So this method will be responsible for populating that response. So let's set the code in here. So we'll say ctx.response.status code is equal to the integer conversion of HTTP status code dot okay. We'll do okay for now. And I guess if it's shut down, we'll do dot. What are some of the other things? Gone. Let's just do no content, just so we can specify or determine and look at the response there. And let's also, once we've actually populated it in the process request, let's just log the response real quick. So we'll say console.writeLine responding ctx.response this time .status code, and we'll say ctx.response.content type along with the length. So ctx.response.content length 64. So yeah, there's a couple other headers that you can access directly as members, but these also all just funnel into the actual ctx.response.headers, which is cool. So let's go ahead and run this. Build errors. What happened? Oh, did I not? I didn't put a semicolon. That's why. All right. So we'll do this. Index.html. We respond with 200 and 0. So you see that the status is 200, and you can see that in the network tab there, also here. But let's also go to shutdown and just see what happens. So shutdown, and good. We send it. I don't know why it's sending a 200 here. Did we? Oh, because we don't return. That's why. So make sure to return if we get shut down. Yeah, so 204. No content. But then we see that, all right, it's ended with code 0. Press any key to shut down. Cool. Yeah. I did also forget to explicitly mention, but that request URL will just give you the raw request, and then absolute path gets you anything after the actual endpoint, or not the, that will get you the actual endpoint. So whatever's after the domain name. But it doesn't have to be a file. It can just be a route like shutdown. It can also be index.html and whatnot. But for now, let's actually, let's go ahead and populate this thing. So let's use some of the files. Let me actually, let me set a couple of things up here. So in static HTTP server, I just want to make sure that nothing's visible. And then I also want to get a reference command out just so I can show you guys. So in your .NET projects, for some reason, if you were to go ahead and create a folder, it doesn't always do that properly in the physical directory. And also, if you were to create files underneath that folder, it would just create the files in the base directory. So we're going to create a new folder in the file system and call it view. And then in here, we'll have our HTML files. So I'll actually go ahead and open this up with code, with Visual Studio Code, just so I can, yes, thank you. And you can refresh it and you'll see that there will be nothing because it doesn't see that or it sees it, but it doesn't consider it a part of the solution. So we need to actually tell it, so in this directory, we want to have our files. So let's just go ahead and create an index.html file. So doc type HTML, HTML head. We'll just say index here. We'll actually make it an H1 element. And then we can also, let's, in our index file, let's create a button to actually shut down the server. So button, or actually I think we have to make a form. Yeah, so form method is equal to post, doesn't matter what it is. And then we'll just say action is equal to /shutdown, like so. And then we'll just do button type is equal to submit. So whenever we click this button, it will call the action with the method. Type is equal to submit, and we'll say shutdown server. There we go. Okay, so pretty simple HTML file. Just has a header and a button to shut down the server. So this is a physical directory in our static HTTP directory. But the thing is, the executable won't see this because it's over here. This is where the executable is. So what we need to do is we need to copy this over. So we'll go into the product properties, go to build events, and then in post build event command line, we need to actually tell it to copy the directory over. So copy, and it's going to be open quotes, $. I don't know if I can't zoom in here, unfortunately. I'll probably put it in the comments, but it's copy, $, open parentheses, project directory, close parentheses, view, and then /star, and then close quotes. So the project directory, that's just a Visual Studio variable. It's just the directory of the project. And then view is just our directory within that project directory. So that's this one right here. And we want to copy all the files over to target directory as a Visual Studio variable, and then view. So we need to create a directory in the executables directory called view, and it will just copy all the files over. So if I delete that, so let's save these properties, and then we'll build, and you can see that it's in the output pane. It will copy the file, and then we'll also see in the debug or in the output directory, you'll see it copies it over. And this will happen every time we build. So that's that. So we now have access to files in the view directory. So let's try and write it. So for shutdown, we send back no content, which is okay, and then return. Apart from that, we want to determine if we actually find the file. So we need to look for the file in our directory. So we're going to say if file.exists, and then we're going to call absolute. Sorry, that's not something yet. But we need to, file is something that we need to use. So using system.io, and file.exists essentially just gives us a Boolean if it exists or not. But however, we can't just use this because we're not hosting out of the executables directory. We're hosting out of a directory relative to the executables directory, or maybe an absolute directory, but we need to find that path. So we're going to have just a function to make things easy. And I'm going to call it private string absolute path. And we'll pass in a route here. And it will return. So we're just going to have a specification here. If the path starts with a slash, then we want to, we essentially just want to have a slash between the host directory and the route. Yeah, so we're going to say return path, sorry, the condition will be route.starts with slash or host directory dot ends with slash question mark, and then if either of those are true, then we don't want to insert a slash, so we'll say host directory path with nothing separating them in the concatenation, and then otherwise we're going to want to insert something, so host directory slash path, sorry, route. So we're essentially just extending the route upon the host directory. And this will make things easier if we ever want to do a dynamic HTTP server where we want to have different routes that map to actual functions. But we'll take care of that next video. Okay, so in here, if file.exists, then we want to write this file to the response. So we're going to do it like this. So we're going to do a try and catch because there are a couple possible errors and we need to treat them differently. So there's going to be a try block where we actually write the file. And then there's going to be a catch for an HTTP listener exception. And in this case, we don't want to rewrite to the output. And I played around with this while I was testing, but essentially when we get an HTTP listener exception, it's often because there's something wrong with the output stream. So trying to write more to the output stream will just lead to more exceptions. So we need to respond with the status code of an internal server error, but we cannot actually write an error file to it. So we'll say ctx.response.status code is equal to HTTP status code internal server error, and then we'll actually just write that out to console.writeLine exception e.message. But for any other exception, we can rewrite to the output. So catch exception e, because this indicates that there's nothing corrupt with the output stream. So we'll need to have an error file. So I'll just go ahead and create that. So error.html, and I'll just copy index. Oops. I'll copy index.html over, except I'll just rename a couple things. So error, and then it's just like that. Okay. So if there's an exception, then we do want to write the file. So we also need to indicate that there was an error. So status code internal server error. But we will write something, but we'll also console log it as well with the type of the, just like so. Okay. So we're going to want to have a method to actually send a file. And just because we're going to want to do it in several possible places. We might want to do it here. We're going to want to do it in the exception catching. So we're going to want to have a private async function that sends a file. I don't know if it has to be async. Doesn't look like it. It doesn't have to be. We can just say this here. So private void send file, and the parameters that we're going to send in are the response and the file path, and that's all. So HttpListener response, and then string file path. And then what we will do is we'll call this function. So in the try, we will say ctx.response.status code is equal to the integer of http status code dot OK, and then we will send file, and we'll pass in ctx.response so it can populate that object, and then also the route, which will be the absolute path. So we need to call that absolute path function with route. Oh, and I suppose this route also isn't valid because it needs to be an absolute path as well. So we just say that there. And we'll need to be using this absolute path a couple times, so we'll just store it as a local variable. So absolute path is equal to just absolute path of the route. And then we can use this variable in the functions there. Okay. So we're going to send the file here, and then we also want to send the error file for when we catch a general exception, and that will just be send file, the response object, and then error path, which is the variable we set up here, error.html. So that's here. And you know what? We will also need to send in the absolute path of the error path. So absolute path, like so, just because it's not in the base directory. We want to be able to customize this essentially, or just not specify it. But we're not going to add that validation right now. Okay, so for send file, we're going to want to open up a file stream. So depending on how big a file is, since this is a static file server, we don't necessarily know. So we're going to want to write it in blocks. And this will allow us to send larger files like MP3 files or video files that aren't just text files. So we're going to want to open up a stream. So stream input is equal to new file stream. And we'll open up the file path, and the access is filemode.open. And then we're going to have a try and catch block. And we'll see why we need the try and catch block. Actually, can we just do a try and finally? Oh, you can. No way. Okay. So I'll see if this works, but actually, you don't know. We're going to do a try and catch. but we don't need to we don't care about the exception, but because we just need it to close the input. So if we ever run into an error, we need to close the input no matter what, because this has happened before. If you're loading a larger file and it takes a little bit, the browser is going to send multiple requests, especially with media files. So if it runs into an error with reading the stream, it needs to close the input stream no matter what. Because if we send another request for the same file, this stream will still be open. So it will just continuously throw errors. So in the catch block, we need to say input.close. And then we want to throw the error up the stack or down the stack. So this just propagates it, and we don't even need to know what the exception is here. We just need to close the input. And I'll test with finally. But yeah, I'll test it with finally, just so we don't even need to have this keyword here, but I'll just see. Okay, so we have our input stream, and we're going to actually read to it. So we first have to set our header values. So response.content length 64 is equal to inputs.length. That's just the length of the stream. Content encoding. So content encoding is equal to encoding.utf8. And we're going to see exactly how to set that as UTF-8, but it will just be implicit. And then the content type is the last thing. So this might not be something you consider at first, but there are a million different content types, and they all correspond to different files, but you have to tell the client what they're receiving, because if they don't specify the file, the direct file like we are here, but if it were a dynamic HTTP server where you weren't necessarily specifying a direct file path, then you wouldn't necessarily know what you're getting back. You could be getting JSON, but you could also be getting HTML. You wouldn't know directly. So what we're going to need is something called a MIME type. And I created a little file here that may or may not have been taken from the internet. But it essentially just has a dictionary mapping file extensions to their MIME types. So you can look through it here, and there's a couple that you might recognize: text/HTML, application/JSON is somewhere in there, text/XML. There's also WASM in there. So we'll just copy this in here, and we'll make it a static thing for the server. So we have get MIME type, which essentially just has path.get extension for the route, and then if it has the key, otherwise we just return a default. So that's this dictionary here. So what we want to do now is in our send file function, we want to set this type. So we will say response.content type is equal to get MIME type of the file path. Sorry, give me 2 seconds. Okay, so we have the headers set up. Now we're actually ready to read into it. So we want to read in blocks, and this is going to require a byte array. So we'll have byte buffer is equal to new byte, and we'll say this is what's a good number? Let's get Python out here. Let's do a number like 1024 times 64. something like that. 65536. All right. Don't know what that is. That might be 2 to the 16 if my memory serves me correctly. Okay, so we have and we'll read in blocks of this size. So we'll allocate a number of bytes integer, so number of bytes, and then we'll have a while loop. So in this while loop, we're gonna set the number of bytes with the read function, and then just run the loop while we are reading bytes. So while n bytes is equal to input.read buffer. So we're reading from into the buffer, 0 offset, and the count is going to be buffer.length. And while this is greater than 0, then we want to write to the output stream. So response, and again, C# makes it so easy. Response.outputStream.write. We write a byte array, so buffer, 0 offset, and count is number of bytes. And then response.outputStream.flush. Make sure you flush it, otherwise it's going to go haywire. So this just essentially sends this block over to the client and just allows us to write another block. And then afterwards we just call inputs.close. Again, very necessary. Okay, so that is sending a file. So we now have this. So if our file exists, then we want to set OK and send the file. If we run into an error, something will happen. All right, I think this should work. Let's run. I suppose we didn't set a not found case, but it'll all work in good time. So index.html. Aha! It works. Look at that. So we have index, which is just our file, and then the button to shut down the server. And we get a 204 for no content, and the browser just keeps the index file open because nothing happened. Because it didn't receive any more content to send. Okay, so if the file exists, then we have that, and we're good. Otherwise, we're going to want to send the error. So 404 not found. However, we're going to need to do the same kind of try catch because there could be a problem with the file stream. There could be an HTTP problem, but we're going to want to abstract this out. So we have our send file function. But we're going to want to have another function called something, and it's going to be write a file. And I know it doesn't make any sense, but we just want to name it differently. So I actually did make a mistake. This send file function should be async. And we need to do await response.outputStream.write async. And that should work. Yeah. So this needs to be an async function just to make things a little more performance efficient. Okay. This needs to be an await task or an async task function. So now when we call send file, we need to await it. Okay. So we're going to have a new function called write file. So private async task write file. And then we'll pass in an HttpListener response string file path. And we're just going to take this try and catch chain and cut it and paste it into write file. And file path will now just replace absolute path, but we're still going to take the absolute path of the error, And then we just need to remove the context tag and just replace it with just the response variable. So any references to response, just make sure it references the local variable. All right, so this is what it should look like. We have our try where we set the response status code, and again, response is now the local argument variable. Nice. So we set our status code, and then we await sending the file. The response in the file path we're now assuming to be, actually I guess we don't assume it to be absolute anymore, just because this will be this will be a public async function, because we might want to call this in a dynamic route per se. So this will not be assumed to be an absolute path. So we need to make it an absolute path, like so. So now we send the file. If we get an HTTP exception, then we do this. If we get any other, we send the error file. So if file.exists absolute path. You'd love my C++ videos. Thank you. I enjoyed doing them too, very much. Okay. Yes. If file exists. This song does bang. I'm gonna turn it up. It's I don't know if you guys can hear it. Hopefully you guys can hear that just a little bit. So if the file exists, then we want to return, or we want to await the file. So await write file async, and that's going to be async now. And I guess we need to say send file is also async. So await write file async, and we're going to pass in ctx.response and the non-absolute path. So just route, because again, we don't want to double convert it to absolute path, because it will do a view/view/index.html, which is what we do not want. All right, so we await that there. Otherwise, we're going to do a not found. So await write file async ctx.response not found path, and then we need to actually create that. So not found.html, and that's just going to be the same as the error, except we're going to call it not found. And otherwise, we also need to say ctx.response.status code is equal to the integer conversion of http status code dot not found. So in write file async, we set it to a default of OK, and I suppose we could customize that and have a parameter. But for now, we're just going to keep that we set it here as default OK, and then you can set it afterwards if you'd like. Okay. I mean, I guess... What's the default status code, actually? Let me comment out all of these places that I set their status code, and see what the default status code is. Here, let me just do a quick Control F. Status code, all commented. Good. All right, so let's run this. I'm just going to check to see what the default status code is. Looks to be 200. Yeah, responding 200. Okay. And I don't set that anywhere. Let me just make sure I don't set that anywhere, because I don't want to do something incorrect and then assume that it's correct. Hold on, where's our loop? Am I messing up? Here we go. All right, so we process our request, have not set the status code. Actually, I can just see what the status code is from here. 200, okay. It's, yeah, all right. So we don't need to actually set okay in this function here. We just want to be able to overwrite it. So it's going to be okay by default, but we just want to overwrite it. But the thing is, this just allows us to write that response code before calling the function, and we don't need to be held liable for that. So this will just overwrite it, and this will write it as not found, and write to file async does not overwrite it unless we run into an internal server error. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So let's try and access a couple other files. Or let's actually just make sure the not found path works, because we're looking at that. So unable to connect. Let me just continue. So respond with that. And then we also have asdf.html not found. Perfect. 404. And then we can also shut down the server, and all good on that end. Wonderful. So we have static files, and I guess we can just play around with a couple things, and let's try test.html, and we'll say test. And then we'll also have a button to go to index.html. So /index.html. And let's also have another directory, a subdirectory called test. And we'll put this file in there. Okay. So again, we need to rebuild so it copies everything over. And you can do the Control-Shift-B. Oh, I need to make a change so that it actually does copy. There we go. So 3 files copied. Oh, does it not do a deep copy? Uh-oh. Give me 2 seconds. Let me see what we need to update the command to so it does do a deep copy. Sorry, wrong. There we go. Windows CMD deep copy. Copy directory and sub. Is it xcopy? No, I don't want to use robocopy. Xcopy is what I want. So xcopy. Okay, so this. Okay, so we're gonna do a new command here. So ehci. Let me actually just keep this open on the side here. Okay, so we're gonna go back and do our project properties, and then the post build event will now be xcopy, and we're gonna copy from project directory /view, and we can get rid of the /star.star, get rid of that, and then it's still going to be target directory view, but this time we're going to do /e/h/c/i, and then let's build. One failed. Hold on, no, that's Python. Overwrite. Oh, I need to bypass xcopy no prompt. /y. Okay. So EHCIY. There we go. 4 files. Yes, 4 files copied. Error index not found, and the test file. Perfect. Thank you, Stack Overflow. All right, let's start. And let's go back here. So we have not found, and let's go to index.html. Okay. Oh, and then it's going to be, oh, what is it? Not that. Test/tests.html. Good. All right, so responding test, and then we can also go back to index, and we're all good. Shut down the server. All good to go. All right, so subdirectories work now, which is good. Okay, you might be thinking, all right, so we have our static file server. You could stop watching right now if you wanted. But what about directories? What if we wanted to do something where we just list all the files in a directory? So that would require us to go back in a process request and say else if file.exists, directory.exists, absolute path. You might be, well, okay, but how would we customize that? It's not going to be as simple because we would have to generate an HTTP file, and add it somewhere. But that could get complicated with hard coding stuff in. So we're going to introduce the concept of formatting variables or formatting arguments. Another application of this would be the error path. If you want to tell the user what happened, you don't just want to give them a 500. You can send them, hey, we have this type of error with this message. You might want to do that. So we're going to have formatting variables using C#'s string.format. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to go into our view directory, and I'm going to put in a paragraph element, and it's going to take in a 0 and a 1, and these have to be in curly braces because this is what C# reads as formatting variables. So it will replace the 0 and the 1 and their curly braces with the arguments that we pass in. So we need a way to actually send this. So we're going to create a new send file function, and it's going to be send file formatted. So private async task send file formatted async. And we're going to pass in the same arguments as before, the response and the file path. But this time we're going to have another argument called arguments. So the way to specify a variable number of arguments is params. So we do params string array and args. So we're essentially just, you can pass in any number of string arguments after the file path, and it will just set it in this array here. The only difference between this method and the send file method is we need to read things as text so we can string format it. And the only difference here is that we can't use the input stream. I'm gonna try and see if we can, but during the video I'm gonna do what I know works. So the way we're gonna do this is we're first gonna get the text. So we will say string content is equal to file.readAllText, and we just pass in the file path. And I believe this should just be a raw, yeah, that should just be a raw path. Yes. No absolute there. And then we're going to format it. So we'll do a try just in case there are any exceptions. So string formatted is equal to string.format. We pass in content, and then the arguments is just the params, just the string array there. So the content I misspelled. So we try doing that, and if it works, then we set content to formatted. Because if there's an error, we don't want to compromise the integrity of the actual content variable. And then we'll do a catch, exception E, then console.writeLine could not format file e.message, and we'll do a string interpolation there. Like so. Okay, and then we'll set our header values as before. So response.content_type is equal to get MIME type on the file path. Then we'll say response.content encoding, or sorry, content length. What was the order we did it up here? Length encoding. I'll actually just copy this over because it doesn't make a difference. So content length 64 is just input, or sorry, not input.length. That's going to be content.length now. Encoding is still UTF-8, and then we get the MIME type as well. However, we can't just send a string to the output string. We need to encode it as bytes. So we need to say byte array buffer is equal to encoding.utf8.getBytes of content. So it just gets the bytes from the string. Then we await response.outputstream.writeAsync, and we're going to do buffer 0, and count is going to be content.length. And then we want to flush. So response.outputstream.flush. And oh, I guess you could do async too. Nice. All right, so we await response.outputstream.flush async. But now we have the ability to format our files. So let's try this with the exception. So this will be when we get a general exception, we want to send file formatted. And we want to pass in variables. So the two formatting variables will be e.getType.toString and then also e.message. So we want to print it out here in the console, but then we also want to send it with the file. So let me actually just do something here. In send file and send file formatted, we want to do response.outputstream.flush or flush async, just in case we're calling this with the error file. What happened? Oh, sorry, await, not async. So just in case there is any existing content, like for example, if something happened in the middle of writing a file here in the middle of this loop, there would be some content in the output stream, so we need to flush it. Okay. And can I clear it actually? I don't think I can. No, I can't. Okay. Yeah, so we're sending this file formatted with the type and message. So let's go ahead and try this out. I guess I want to forcefully throw an exception. So after we send, say, index.html, I want to throw arithmetic exception, test arithmetic exception. Okay, let's start. Nope, doesn't like it. Throw new. arithmetic exception. There we go. All right, so listening, index.html. Uh-oh. What do you mean the operation cannot be performed after the response has been submitted? Oh, does this have some, oh. Something happened where it doesn't want to continue sending stuff. Let me put a breakpoint here. Okay, so we await send file, and it does that okay. I believe it, I think it got it properly. Or it's, yeah, so it got it properly. Throw new arithmetic exception. Thing is, it's not liking this now. So, console.writeLine, yeah, so it doesn't want to. Oh, my audio's down. Uh-oh. That's no good. I can also turn the music down a little bit, and hopefully that works. I can also just, let me up the gain a little bit, and maybe that'll work. Okay, that might be something. Okay. So it doesn't want to resend a file even though, await. Did something happen with, yeah, okay, there we go. What happened? Okay, it just for our sake, I don't know how to fix this right now, but we're just going to forcefully throw the exception before we send a file. So listen, and then we do that. All right, there we go. Error 500 is the internal server error. System.arithmetic exception, and we get the exact exception. Shut down. Beautiful. Okay, so we now have the ability to format a file, which is beautiful. And we might want to just pass in those parameters here with write file async. So let's have another argument here called params string args, and then we will determine which function to use in the try block. So if args.count is greater than 0, then we want to format it. So await send file formatted async with response, the absolute path of file path and the arguments. And then otherwise, we just want to send the file normally, like so. So let's, I guess we'll get to try this out with our directory paths. Yeah, so let's go back into process request where we were determining if the directory actually existed. So we just want to have a way to just add a bunch of elements, and a good way to do that is with a list. So we're going to create a new file called directories, or directory.html, and I'll just copy index.html over. We'll have a title, which will be a format variable, a header, which will also be a format variable, the same one as above. But then we'll want to have two lists, one for subdirectories and then one for just files. So we'll have a header, so h3 subdirectories, and we'll have a list here, so ul, and this will be formatting parameter 1, and then also files, which will be formatting parameter 2 within a list. Forgot that. There we go. No, I don't want that there. Stop format. Damn it, asshole. I don't want you to format this. I suppose I can just do it up here and just have a new line at the beginning of each one. Yeah, that works. That actually works well. Okay. So we're going to say that we're going to generate a list with if we want to list stuff. So string directory list is equal to an empty string. So string.empty, and string file list is equal to string.empty as well. And then we also want to just have an extra check here. So if not route.ends with a slash, then we want to just tack that on at the end, just because we're looking at a directory, so it's going to help with the links. So routes plus equals slash. All right, so let's generate our directory list, and we're going to use LINQ here, or I forgot what it's called, but it's something having to do with a query. So it looks like HTML or SQL. So directory list is equal to string.join, and we're going to join. Wait. String.join an empty separator, and the values that we're going to do are directory.get directories, and these will be all the subdirectories from the absolute path, and we're going to select elements. We're going to do essentially a for loop, and a good way to do that in C# is with the .select. So .select, and then we're going to pass in a lambda expression. So this lambda expression takes in a string as an argument. So whatever the type of the list is, so directory.get directories, it returns a list or an array of strings. Thank you, Kalari. So this returns an array of strings, and we're going to select each string from the array and do something to it. And it will output another list that we can join using string.join. So we're going to select here, and we're going to want to return something. So we're first going to just get the relative path after the directory. So just I don't know how to explain this, but just the last element in the URL. So after the last index, or the last slash, that's going to be integer idx is equal to math.max of, because there's two possible slashes, don't know why, but it happens. So math.max of s.last index of / and /. So we're just getting whichever one comes later. So then we're going to want to get the relative path. So string relative path is equal to s.substring idx plus 1, just like so. And then we're going to return an unsigned or an unordered list element. So return, we're going to do some interpolation here. Okay. And it will be a \n for new line, then 2 tabs. And it's going to be a UL element. So this is essentially going to be HTML. So UL a href, so the LINQ will be, we need a quote with an escape character. I'm sorry, I'm going to create the element, and then we will populate the values. So the LINQ looks like this. So href, and then we have 2 quotes, and then we do \a \ul. Okay. So the LINQ will be just route and then also rel path. And remember we added that last slash here, so there is a slash in between, and then the LINQ, the text should just be relative path. So we're essentially getting the route, which will just be it's essentially the directory that we're requesting to view. And then relative path is just the path from that directory, but we only want to display that last part, so we only take this. And return returns from this lambda function, so this generates another list containing all of these concatenated strings. And then we're going to do something very similar for the file list. except it's going to be, so we're going to say file list is equal to string.join, empty string joining directory.get files from the absolute path. And then it looks like it's going to be the exact same HTML content. So that's how that works. We're now going to await write file async, and we're going to pass in the response, or ctx.response. The file path will be dir path, which we need to set as a local variable. So private string dir path is equal to directory.html. So write file async, ctx.response, directory path, and then we're going to pass in a couple of parameters. So if you go back to view, we have the header, the subdirectory list, and the file list. So the first parameter we'll just say is route, then we'll have a directory list, and then a file list. Like so. And we should be good from here. Let me build to see that, make sure that we're good. So it copied everything over. Directory is in there. So let's start listening. So we'll do index.html. We get 200. Let's try just doing, so let's go to our test directory and just see if it does it properly. So test, good. So we have our header, which is /test/good. That's also the tab title. No subdirectories, and files is just a link to test.html. And you can see the link down below works, and we'll also click on it and it gets test.html, which is good. And we'll go back to index, and let's also just try getting the parent directory. So you can see that we have our /, just meaning it's the root directory, technically view, but it's just the root directory. And then we do click on test, and we can go to the test directory. That is pretty cool. I like that a lot. I suppose, you know what? Let's shut down the server. Let's add something here. Let's do a // So directory list is equal to, if route does not equal /, so we want to get the parent directory, so we want to be able to go back. So if it's not just a /, then we want to say directory list plus equals another string interpolation, so \n /t ul ahref is equal to, we'll say route ... right? Or do I need to get, oh, I think I need to get, yeah. So we need to still get the index of the last /, which will be in route. So if, we'll say if route dot length is greater than 1. So route.last index of either of those. Okay. And then we want to get everything up until that. So string rel path, or string parent path, is equal to s.substring, or sorry, route.substring from 0 to, and the length will be idx, idx plus 1, or no, idx, wait. It's index, yes. And then we want to do parent path will be the link, I believe. Or, yes, because this is the raw route, not the absolute one. So we get the parent path, and then we want to just make it ... Okay. Now let's rerun. It's not liking this. Oh, because we're in this main directory, so there is nothing that we don't want to be able to go beyond. So we'll do test, and now we have the dot dot, which goes back to test. This might not work. Let me set a breakpoint to see what we're actually looking at here. Oh, did I shut stuff down? Oh, yeah. Okay. There we go. So we have route. Oh, yeah, because last index is considering this thing here. So let me actually set let me put this line up ahead. So let me put this at the top. So let me put this before we concatenate anything. Okay. Here we go. So we have test. There's nothing. Oh, because I overwrite it, that's why. So directory list plus equals, and then we'll just do file list plus equals as well. All right, reload, there we go. And this should, oh, it's still going back to test though. You know what I think this might be? We need to do last index of. Is there a start index? The search proceeds from start index towards the beginning. Okay, so this needs to be. I'm just going to get the int n is equal to route dot length -1. So we will start the search from n, so we exclude that last slash. Okay, this should be good now. Reload. It's still going to test. Let me just create a breakpoint here. All right, so n is equal to 5. 0, 1, 2, 3. Oh, is it -2? I think, yeah, it has to be -2. Okay. Yeah. And then this should, yeah, this should be it. No, it's, what? This is so unfortunate. There we go. So n is 4. Index is 0. And we want to go route.substring 0. Yeah, exactly. Oh, I know what's going on. I know what's going on. This needs to be an IDX +1 because we're not having the slash. So the href is just empty, so it's going to the same link. There we go. I mean, let me just verify that real quick. Let's create a directory. We'll do that in VS Code. Test2, and we'll put that inside. And I believe this should copy it over because it's xcopy. Need to do rebuild. There we go. Let me just verify that it actually this exists. where did I put this? Source repos, that's where. Okay, good. Directory is copied over. All right, so we'll do test, test2, and this goes back to test. Good. Okay, so that works. So we can now navigate stuff. Beautiful. Okay. Yeah, that's fun. So we now have a fully functional static file server with directory lists and error paths and all that stuff, and a shutdown function. Last thing I'll do is let's add some customization that you can do with the command line. So in program.cs, we will go through a couple of things here. So we have our host directory, and we'll just create these as variables. So string host URL is equal to http://localhost 8080, and then string host directory is equal to view, and we will just copy these over to the constructor. So we're in the main file now. And let's just go through the arguments that we get so we can set these values. So for int I is equal to 0, I is less than args.length, I++. Then we'll do if I is less than args.length -1. So there's essentially something after it. Then we'll essentially create the format where you can specify an argument with the -d for directory and -u for URL. So you need to indicate that there's an argument there, but that -u and -d, that counts as an argument itself. So we need to make sure that there's an indicator and then something after it. So it's a valued argument. So string value is equal to args at I+1. And then we're just going to test to see what the switch is, or the indicator is. So if args at I is equal to -d, then we set the directory. So host dir is equal to value. And let's actually just do the URL first. So if args at I is equal to -u, then host URL is equal to value. So we have default values, but now we can specify it beyond that. So let's run this just to make sure it still works. Oh, I didn't specify that. So program.cs, we need to say value dot ends with a slash. And if it does, then just value. Otherwise, value plus a slash. Just because the prefixes must end with that /. Okay. And just make sure everything still works. Yep, all good. Now let's just try running this out of a some directory. So we have, I keep forgetting where I put this. I need to find it again. Source repos static HTTP server. So we can host it out of this view directory here. So I'm just going to copy this path over. So we'll do bin debug view, or not. So bin debug. And I'll actually delete the view directory just to show you that this does work, in fact. So let me open up a command prompt. And I will go to this directory. Actually, let me copy this over to somewhere where we can actually do this. So we'll copy this over to documents, and then we want to also have the view directory in, we'll say documents here. Actually, you know what, we'll put static HTTP server in source. Okay. So static HTTP server is in a directory, so // source, and we want our view directory to be here. This might actually have to be on the same disk, but I'm going to try it, see if it doesn't have to. Okay, so we can call static HTTP server -d, and then we're going to paste this path in, and nice. So it still does it. Still works properly. And just to show you guys that I'm not crapping you, this is ddocuments view, which is not the debug directory. So I'm going to call, let's say index.html. We'll open with Notepad and index from D. So we got this index, and we index from D. So that is a quick customization option that you can do. So you can now set the executable on your path variable, and then you can just run it from anywhere and just specify the directory that you want. But yeah, that is that's our static HTTP server. And if you wanted to, you can test it with a bunch of files. We're going to actually be using this with WASM. So WebAssembly, which will be our next project. Just a little sneak peek of that. But you'll be able to send WASM files over the server, because we can't. You can't just open up a file in the browser just because JavaScript doesn't have proper security permissions, but you can request it over a server. So yeah, that is pretty much all I have for you guys today. I hope you guys learned something and enjoyed. This was certainly a fun project to do, but yeah, until see you guys next time, have a good one, and make sure to play around with this, please do. We'll be continuing on with this, and we'll be doing a dynamic HTTP server, one that you can do, one that you can put like custom routes in, and essentially have custom functions. But yeah, that's all I have for you guys today. Hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you next time. Have a good one.